afternoon again, everyone. I am Amalaya Modi, and my part in this video report presentation is the conditional and related statements. So before I start, I'll introduce to you first my subtopics, which are the following: equivalent forms of the conditional, the converse, inverse, and contrapositive, and the Shepherd's stroke and the NAND gate. So let's start with the equivalent forms of the conditional. So ano nga ba ang conditional statement? Conditional statement are a fundamental concept in logic, mathematics, and programming. So dinidescribe niya ang relationship between the two statements, often in an if-then format. So yun ang i-discuss natin for today's video. So every conditional statement can be stated in many equivalent forms. It is not even necessary to state the antecedent before the consequent. So i-discuss natin yan later on. For instance, if you have the conditional statement, if I live in Boston, then I must live in Massachusetts. So, pwede rin natin siya i-state as I must live in Massachusetts if I live in Boston. So, let's elaborate it more. So, gaya nga ng sinabi ko kanina, conditional statement is madalas naka-if-then format. So, we can use this format P, arrow, Q. So, yung arrow dyan is nagre-represent siya ng salitang then. So, kada conditional statement, P then Q, can be written in these following equivalent forms. So, para mas maintindihan and ma-identify natin yung equivalent forms niya, or the P then Q form niya, we have to identify first the antecedent and the consequent. So, antecedent is something that comes before and influences what happens next. So, it's the if part of conditional statement, while ang consequent naman is the result or outcome that follows from the antecedent. So, yun naman ang then part ng conditional statement. Okay, so we have here an example. So, let's write this following in if P then Q form. So, let's start with the letter A. The number is an even number provided that it is divisible by 2. So, para makuha natin ang equivalent form niya, i-identify muna natin ang antecedent and consequent. So, in this case, antecedent natin is yung it is divisible by 2. Bakit? Because being divisible by 2 is the condition or the phrase that precedes the another, that leads to the conclusion or the consequent that the number is an even number. So, kung isusulat natin sa if P then form, magiging if it is divisible by 2, then the number is an even number. Okay, so letter B. In this statement, today is Friday only if yesterday was Thursday. So, ang main clause natin is today is Friday. And ang conditional clause naman natin is if only yesterday was Thursday. So, dito naman, yesterday was Thursday ang antecedent natin because it's the condition that implies the truth of today is Friday. So, ang consequent naman is yung today is Friday. Kasi yun yung conclusion or outcomes that follows the condition nung naunang statement or the phrase. So, ang if P then Q form niya is magiging if today is Friday, then yesterday was Thursday. So, let's proceed in statements related to conditional statements. These are the converse, inverse, and contrapositive. So, the converse of P then Q is formed by interchanging the antecedent P with the consequent Q. So, remember the word interchanging, meaning nagaswap or giswap lang yung antecedent and yung consequent natin. So next, the inverse of P then Q is formed by negating the antecedent P and negating the consequent Q. So remember, yung wavy arrow na yan, it represents that the word is negating, meaning ginadeny or ginakontradict niya yung statement. And the last one is the contrapositive of P then Q naman is formed naman by negating both the antecedent P and the consequent Q and interchanging this negated statement. So, negating and interchanging, ginaswap niya and ginadeny niya yung both antecedent and the consequent doon sa statement. So, remember the differences of these three because we will use this as an example in the next slide. Okay, so let's try this one. We have here a conditional statement, if I get the job, then I will rent the apartment. So, ang antecedent natin dito is yung I get the job. And ang consequent naman natin is I will rent the apartment. So, nagets nyo ba bakit yun ang consequent and yun ang antecedent natin? So, in the given conditional statement, kukunin natin ang converse, inverse, and contrapositive ng statement na to. Okay, so first is the converse. So from its original statement, if I get the job, then I will rent the apartment. Ang converse niya is if I rent the apartment, then I get the job. So di ba nag-interchange lang yung consequent and antecedent natin. Like nag-swap lang sila, i-swap lang yung dalawang statement, and that is converse. So the next one is the inverse. If I do not get the job, then I will not rent the apartment. So, di ba, ginegate niya lang yung antecedent and consequent, meaning contradict niya or dineny. And lastly, the contrapositive. If I do not rent the apartment, then I did not get the job. So, ginegate niya yung statement and gi-interchange niya yung dalawang statement. So, from its original statement, if I get the job, then I will rent the apartment. Ang contrapositive statement niya is if I do not rent the apartment, then I did not get the job. So, nagets nyo ba yung contrapositive? Like, i-contradict niya and i-interchange niya yung dalawang statements. So, let's give another example. If we have a quiz today, then we will not have a quiz tomorrow. So, identify muna natin, of course, ang antecedent and ang consequent natin. So, ang antecedent natin is, we have a quiz today. And ang consequent naman natin, yun yung, we will not have a quiz tomorrow. So, in converse, ang converse statement niya is magiging, if we will not have a quiz tomorrow, then we will have a quiz today. So, gets niyo ba bakit? Kasi nag-interchange lang yung ating antecedent and the consequent, which is the main definition ng converse. So, inverse naman, if we do not have a quiz today, then we will have a quiz tomorrow. And lastly, contrapositive. If we will have a quiz tomorrow, then we did not have a quiz today. So, gets nyo ba? Gets? So, the last subtopic of my part is the Sheffer stroke and NAND gate. Sheffer stroke, denoted by this symbol, is a logical operator that represents not both or incompatible. So, the symbol is read as NAND. So, P NAND Q is equivalent to not P and Q because NAND means not and. So, ang P and Q natin, yun ang ating input, while ang P NAND Q naman ang ating output. So, take a look at the table 5.13. We have here the truth table. So, sa Sheffer stroke, magiging false lang ang output mo kung ang input mo ay both true. And the rest, true na silang lahat. Whether false to false, true false, false true. So we can also use these numbers 1 for true and 0 for false para later on madali natin magets yung NAND gate drawing. So let's elaborate it more. So as I said earlier, our input is the P and Q, while ang output naman natin is the P NAND Q. So we have here the truth values of P and the truth values of Q. So what we are going to do is the input combination. So when we combine the input values true and true, we will have a false because that is the condition. So let's proceed in the table 5.14. So we have here the truth values of P and the truth values of Q. So earlier, diniscuss natin how we get the truth values or the output P and Q. While here naman, ang output naman na kukunin natin is the P NAND P. So, just like earlier, gagawin natin yung ginawa natin kanina na input combination. So, ang kukunin natin na output is the P NAND P. So, dito tayo magfo-focus sa P. So, input combination true and true is makakakuha tayo ng output na false. Gets? And then, next one, ganun pa rin. True, input true, combined with true. So, we'll have an output false. And then the rest, false. So false combination with false is true. So, ulitin lang natin because it's same lang sila. Okay. So, paano naman natin nakuha ang output ng P NAND P, NAND Q, NAND Q? Okay. So, yan ang i-elaborate natin. So, para makuha natin ang truth values ng P NAND P, NAND Q, NAND Q, isa-isahin muna natin sila. So, we have here the P NAND P truth values. So, if i-rewrite natin here, we have false, false, true, true. So, di ba, wala pa tayong truth values ng Q NAND Q. Okay. So, just like what we do earlier, mag-focus tayo sa truth values ng Q. So, we have here true. We have to do the input combination true and true. So, it will give us an output false. So, sa pangalawa naman, we have here a truth value false. So, false and false will have an output true. Okay. So, uulitin lang natin because there's the same thing lang sila. Okay. So, now we have here the truth values of P NAND P and the truth values of Q NAND Q. So, ang hinahanap natin dito is the P NAND P, NAND Q NAND Q. Okay. So, dito naman tayo magfo-focus. So, P NAND P, we will combine it with the Q NAND Q. So, we will do the combination false and false. We will have the output true. That's why true. And then, next one is the false and true combination. Also, we will having an output true. And ganun din dito sa pangatlo. If we have an input true and false, di ba, makukuha natin na value is true pa rin. While the last one, we have here the input true and true, ang makukuha natin na output is false. So, get? Okay, so let's try this one. So, number 1, letter A. Complete a truth table for P, NAND Q, NAND Q. Okay, so this is now our truth table for P NAND Q, NAND Q. So, paano natin ito nakuha? So, P NAND Q, NAND Q, we have here the P. So, di ba, we have a truth table for P, true, true, false, false. Also, we have the truth table of Q, the true, false, true, false. So, earlier, nakuha rin natin yung truth values ng Q NAND Q, which is we did an input combination of true and true, then naging false. So, gawin lang natin yung the rest. Okay. So, we have here the P NAND Q NAND Q. So, we have here the P. Also, we have here the Q NAND Q. So, we will do an input combination true and false. Bakit? Because P, we have here the P and we have here the Q NAND Q. So, we have here the truth values T and false. So, we have the output true. Next one, we have here the input true and true. Kaya nakuha natin yung false. Because yun ang condition ni Sheffer-Stroke na kung magiging false lamang ang output kung ang dalawang input mo is true. Then the next one, false, we have input false and false. Kaya true siya. And ganun din dito sa next. We have false and true. Kaya true pa rin siya. Gets? Okay, so para makuha natin ang conditional statement nung naunang question is gagawa tayo ng another truth table para sa implications for conditional that P implies Q. So as I've discussed earlier, if P, then Q. So if P is true, then the Q must also be true. So, di ba, we have here the truth table of P and we have here the truth table of Q. So, kukunin natin ang implications ng P implies Q. So, paano natin siya makuha? So, gagawin natin ulit yung input combination. So, kukunin natin ang implication ng P and Q. So, if P implies Q. So, if P is true, and then yung Q natin is true din. So, ang P implies Q natin is also true. Because in this situation, if P is true, then Q is true. So, true ang P natin and true din ang Q natin. So, the P implies Q is true. Okay. So, the second one, if P is true, and then yung Q natin is false. So, hindi siya naga-imply dito. So, if true ang P natin, but yung Q natin is false, So, magiging false ang P implies Q natin. Because based on the definition, magiging true lang siya if P is true, then Q is true. But then, false yung ating Q. So, the third one and fourth one, which is ang P natin is false, and then ang Q natin is true. So, titingnan ulit natin dito. So, if P is true, so hindi true ang ating P because false silang pareho. But yung Q, may part dito na true. But then, ang truth table na ilalagay natin is true because wala namang reason to think that it is false. Kasi, hindi sila tugma doon sa definition na if P is true, then Q is true. So, iisipin muna natin or itatry muna natin yung truth value na true and true. Okay. So, after that, pwede tayong dumagdag ng another for our trial and error kung tutugma ba ito sa magiging sagot or sa magiging trial and error natin. Okay. So, we have here, dadagdag tayo ng another truth table ng not P, meaning not P. So, di ba, we have here the P. So, ang not P natin is magiging kabaliktaran because this is a sign of not, which is negation. So, if yung P natin is true, and then ang not P natin is false. So, the rest, ganun din. If P is true, then not P is false. And then, if P is false, then ang not P is true. Okay. So, the last one, we have here the not P or Q. So, may or dito na part. Ibig sabihin, not P or Q. So, ang not P natin is false and then ang Q natin is true. So, ang gusto nating makuha is ang truth value na true. Kaya true ang ilalagay natin. Diba? So, next one is false. And then, ang not P natin is false and then ang Q natin is also false. So, wala na tayong other choice kasi sa or operation, either of the two lang ang kukunin natin. So, false. Okay, false. And then the third one naman is true and true. Ang not P natin is true and then ang Q natin is true. Kaya, true. Kasi or. So, either of the two ang kukunin natin, true pa rin siya. And then last one is, ang not P natin is true and then ang Q naman natin is false. So true ang ilalagay natin kasi ang isa lang ang kailangan natin na false para magtugma siya doon sa previous truth tables. So now, we now have here a truth table of not P or Q, which is true, false, na nagtugma doon sa previous truth table natin ng P NAND, Q NAND Q, na true, false. So, ang magiging conclusion natin, or ang magiging sagot sa question 1B is, based on the truth table, we can see that the P NAND, Q NAND Q is equivalent to not P or Q because same lang sila ng truth table. Kaya we can say na they are equivalent. So that's all for my part. Thank you.